Okay, John Utzon, please be kind and turn off the microphone. Thank you. Unless you want to say something. John Utzon, 1918, 2008. So he lived for 90 years and he left something behind him. So in other words, he earned his life. So John Oberg Utzon was a Danish architect. He was most notable for designing the Sydney Opera House in Australia, completed in 1973, when it was declared a World Heritage Site on 28th of June 2007. Utzon became only the second person to have received such recognition for one of his works during his lifetime after Oscar Niemeyer. But what it is not said here is that Utzon actually left this work, so to speak, before it was finalized, before it was finished, because there were conflicts with the Australian government because of various reasons. The costs went above what was estimated, and maybe other complications. So for a significant period of time, Utzon was not there, but his work is still his work, very much so. So other noteworthy works include the Bagsveld Church near Copenhagen and the National Assembly building in Kuwait. He also made important contributions to housing design, especially with his King of Houses near Helsingør. Utzon attended the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts and was influenced early on by Gunnar Asplund and Alvar Aalto. Great influences. What can I say? I think we should have equally good influences. Even though we cannot meet necessarily in person architects of this magnitude, but today we can have access to their works quite easily. Gunnar Asplund and Alvar Aalto were indeed giants, modest giants, if I can say so, in the field of modern architecture. So he had the significant influences, or well-chosen influences. Because in a way, we choose our influences, we choose our mentors. And if it is said that we are what we read, we could also say we are what we allow ourselves to be influenced by. Here is the man in his older age, keeping his modesty. And this is something to admire at Scandinavians in general, with some notable exceptions, of course, like Bjarke Ingels, whose modesty is not his first quality. Then here we see Utzon playing like a child on the floor. I love this picture, I really do. And I think we should all be children while working on creative projects, architectural or otherwise. Yes, on the floor, like a kid. You look at him. It's beautiful, I think. It's a beautiful picture about a great architect. Because it is true, if you are not childlike, you cannot create. I said this before and I will say it again. Nietzsche thought of three transformations of the human in life. First, you are camel. In other words, you carry a lot of weight on your back. And then you are not unhappy with being just a camel, so you want power and you become a lion. And the lion or the lioness has power. But in the end, even the lion is unhappy, or the lioness, because they want creativity. And in order to be creative, the lion, the king of the jungle, or the lioness, the queen of the jungle, transform themselves into a child, because it is the child who in his serious playing is creative. And so is Utzon in this picture. Drawings, some drawings by the childish master, or childlike master. this is an interesting drawing because it speaks about the platform and the roof, and in between them is the building. But both the platform and the roof are important, and are very important also in the theory of Gottfried Zemper, who thought that the primal house or building that was ever built, the building, so to speak, had four elements: the platform, well, actually, first maybe the hearth where the fire was, then the platform elevated in order to protect the fire from floods and animals and so on, then the enclosure, which was a textile work, and then the roof, which was carpentry. This is an interesting drawing, expressionistic, about this church that he built in Copenhagen, which I had the chance to see. And this is a drawing almost, you'd say, by Sergei Eisenstein, the film director. Its expression goes beyond, its quiet expression goes beyond, in a way, architecture. It's about the event which takes place in the church. And yeah, another drawing on the left, also for the same church. These, I would say, these two drawings, these sketches are of a visionary nature in a way. You feel that Utzon was not indifferent to the theme, that to build a church was somehow different from building any other kind of building. Unfortunately, there are schools of architecture where to make a project for a church is never a task. Very strange. Very, very strange. In the end, after all, you know, if we contemplate the history of architecture, most of the great buildings of the past are churches, temples, chapels, commemorative parks, and so on, memorials. Yet, as I said, there are schools of architecture where this program is never addressed. And I wonder why. Okay. So some sketches. This is also for the same church in Copenhagen, which we are going to see, and of course the opera in Sydney. And now we start with his built work, his own house in Helbæk, Denmark. I understood, somebody told me, but I still have difficulties to conciliate this drawing with what I was told. A student, a Romanian student in London, said that apparently he first built this house without working drawings, just going on the site and indicating, you know, there ad hoc how the building to come into being. But here I see some kind of you know, drawings. Anyway, this is maybe not so important, but it does say something about the experimental nature of his understanding of architecture, his spontaneity, and yet the building, yes, is a rectangular building, but I think Utzon was a complex man, and he did this, but he also did the opera in Sydney. And you'll also see other works where the organic is in tension with a Cartesian side of his architecture. You know, the Danish housing projects are often interesting, and his, I think, maybe more than some other architects. You'll see after this a house he built also for himself, but much later, and in a way different from this house. But the aesthetics of Scandinavian design are always to be admired because of the simplicity, the reticence, the good taste, if I am to say so. You know, there is indeed something to admire here. And the brickwork, which is done with honesty and with skill. His office is still active, and I think some of his, you know, his sons, I don't know how many he had, work in that office as well. Now, this is the house he built for himself towards the end of his life in Mallorca, and you know, it's different. It is different. It's a big house. It's the house of a or almost the headquarters of a man who achieved what is called success in life, and in love with the sun, of course, and the sea. He's a man. He was a born sailor, I would say. He loved the sea. Also, what I didn't mention is that he was influenced in his architecture by exotic cultures, so to speak, by Asia, you know, the most, you know, Japan, China, Southeast Asia, but also by the architecture of South America and some parts of Central America. And he had a wide horizon and in mental horizon, and these influences can be perceived in his work. I would say that he was actually more inspired, besides Gunnar Asplund and Alvar Aalto, by foreign, or I mean not foreign, but cultures that were far away from Denmark. Often his works are in the proximity of the sea. The sea was very important to him. As you can see, no plaster, no makeup, no so-called finishes. And I think great architecture doesn't need them, in as much as a great person doesn't need a makeup. You know, it's really about the soul of the building. If the soul of the building is there, then the building doesn't need, you know, covering up, hiding something. You know, there is nothing to hide. There is beauty in sincerity. You see in the plan here certain parts which are more emphatically treated, and this is done frequently in his work, where he exalts a certain part of his buildings, and that part that is exalted, as I chose now to name it, is usually connected with a certain function within the building. You'll see it in the church in Copenhagen. You see it in the whole of the building, actually in Sydney, but because of the special nature of that building, it was adequate. But in general, he seems to have kind of, he is a very different architect from Louis Kahn. But considering the distinction Kahn made between serving and served spaces, here we also see a certain duality. There are spaces that are don't need, you know, exaltation, so to speak, and there are others that do need it. And you know, there is a certain hierarchy here somehow. Now, this is a house that was on sale, Middlebow house in Hulte by Utzon. No, I think I was wrong. I'm anticipating that it's another house. Here is, again, this is an earlier house that is employs a language that is, rather so-called rational. There isn't much expressionism here, but it's very well built. You see it's very well built, and it still has its tensions, even chromatically, between the red and the black. It's an interesting house itself. Now this one was, I think, on sale, and I took this article and this announcement. So this house went for 3.5 million sterling. I mean, the British currency. It's, what can we say? It was modified to an extent because it was inhabited, but you can still see the house. As a living organism, and it does say something about his conception about domestic architecture, and it has similarities with the house he built for himself early on. He was a young man when he won the competition for the Sydney Opera, and that winning that competition meant he never missed afterwards commissions and clients. It's important if you can win any competition, but especially such a competition, your flood of clients and commissions would be unavoidable. The problem these days is it's very, very difficult to compete against big offices who have, even specialized departments for competitions, and are extremely well knowledgeable, or extremely well prepared to use the most sophisticated software. So for an individual like John Utzon was when he won the opera in Sydney, it's almost impossible to fight with a big office. You might have a brilliant idea, but from having a brilliant idea to present it adequately is a long distance. And so that's why we see all the time that most of the big competitions are won by well-established firms, Sir Norman Foster, Zaha Hadid Architects, Rem Koolhaas, Bjarke Ingels, and so on. That's why I keep saying the students should learn as much as possible with all the sacrifices, the newest technologies, the newest softwares. Don't allow yourselves to be one step behind, because you are losing. For sure, you just can't any longer. Technology is too much present and is a reality. It would be very, very, very hard to compete otherwise. And not only to compete, it would be very, very hard to be hired. You are not hired. If you are manipulating with great skill the T-square and the rectangle, which were abandoned 30 years ago. So if you say my skills are unbelievable with the T-square and the rectangle, they might be, but you are irrelevant. You can't work in an office, and in an office which is digitalized. You're not going to work in ink, to me is incredible that some schools of architecture still live in a remote past. But at the time when Utzon lived, when there was no digital technology, he was able to win the competition for the opera in Sydney with a drawing which was done manually in a very simple way, and I would say even unconvincingly so, because initially his project was rejected. I will tell you the story when we arrive at the building. Fortunately, in the end, it was not rejected, and now Sydney is the proud owner of a building which is the emblem of the city. Now, there were some changes here, I imagine, in time to this building, but you still see something of a, you know, rich house designed by John Utzon. Interesting, this kitchen, part of a long corridor, almost like space. As opposed to the famous Farnsworth house by Mies, which turns its back, the counter of the kitchen, to the natural light. Here, Utzon has the light coming from above, which is very pleasant and useful. It amazes me actually that Mies ignore this fact, that when you work at the counter in the kitchen, you need either artificial light or you'll see the shadow of your own body projected on the counter. Anyway, a very, sumptuous bed. What can I say? This is, I think it's. I'm not an expert, far from it in beds, but this seems to be as wide as it is long. It's probably king size plus or something like this, an extra size for people who want to enjoy sleeping at maximum. Anyway, what a triumphalist bed. The Kingo housing project. I love this project. There are two sections of it, so to speak. In the years after the Second World War, and it's a beautiful, I think, understanding of the intimacy that a home needs, but also interconnectedness with other similar houses. So the house is in L-shaped, but there is the courtyard, which is part of the house, square, and it functions very well. And it is yes, there is a car there, but at least it's just one car and no more, and it has a minimal space really. But the courtyard is a great luxury, and to have the house opened towards the courtyard, your own courtyard, I think is a beautiful thing. And you'll see a grouping of such houses. Yeah, essentially, this is how this is more than a house. I should call it in Romanian would be a gospodărie. It's more, and for this I like it. The house is not separated from the courtyard. It creates a whole together with the courtyard. And here it is, the planning, the site planning. So we just saw one unit, but here we have, I don't know, 30, 40 units together and grouped kind of, interestingly, in a playful way. Nice work. Nice work because you have multiplicity in unity. There is multiplicity, each unit identifies itself, yet each unit is not different from the others. And yes, you have variety in unity or multiplicity in unity. And nature is left, in its pristine condition, is not, controlled by man, is allowed to breathe freely, so to speak. And I think we should do this as much as possible and not try to, design it. There is no need really for it. If you need design, you can do it in your courtyard, but that's about it. Maybe even there we shouldn't design too much. It's a great project, I think, and it's attached to the earth. It belongs to the earth. Is romantic, yet it is rational. I would love to live in such a house. Truly, you look through the window and you see the vegetation in your own courtyard, and there are a few annexes there, and so on. It's nice, and the tree of life is in the center, perhaps. I imagine this is the car, no? An interesting car, anyway. Now, the Fredensborg houses are similar, and just the site plan, the planning is a little bit different, but in essence, it's about the same. If you compare these houses with these houses, here you see an architect who understood the value of multiplicity in unity. You have individuality, but you also have unity. Here is just 1 + 1 + 1 equals 1 + 1 + 1, while here you have 1 + 1 + 1 equals 3. Very few people know that the man who designed the opera in Sydney also did such works, and you'll see he did other works. And I think this is a shame, because he didn't do just the opera in Sydney. Well, many people don't even know who did the opera in Sydney. They know the building, but they don't know the author, the young man who won the competition, thanks to Eero Saarinen. Otherwise, he would not have won it. I will tell you the story. Is an interesting story, telling again the unsettling story of the fact that evaluations in architecture are subjective very often, and to a good an appreciable extent. Now, this architecture truly, it could have been anywhere almost, and look how nature is left as it should be left, I think. More so these days than maybe during his lifetime, or when the project was made. And you have this duality between the opaque wall and a masonry wall and the glassed wall, which opens towards the garden, the inner garden. So there is a tension and a distinction to an extent between introversion and extroversion. You are extroverted towards your own garden, but rather introverted in relationship with what is outside of your house. Now, this is a very intimate environment, really, and I think one mentally and psychically grows healthy in such an environment. More healthy, I would say, than the people living in these, because here again there is no attempt to connect. Here there is a level of connection, and you feel it, you are aware of it when you walk towards the entrance to your house. Now we arrive at this church, which is a remarkable building, and about which Kenneth Frampton writes extensively in his studies of tectonic architecture. Is a very good building, this is the building, and there are influences here coming from Asia. It's a more complex work. It has the church itself here, and then there are other spaces, you know, maybe even a school or you know, some housing units. So the sacred prolongs itself towards the profane. There is they share the same building, but they are distinct at the same time. So to have the sacred and the profane within the same building, I think is well, it's not totally profane, but it is. This is not the church. The church is here, and yet there are functions here related to the church. And this is the interior of the church itself, where you see the exaltation that I mentioned before, appropriately so, for light. The roofing also expresses the longing for the infinite or for God creatively. Something some churches in this world refuse to understand, that the church should be creative and not a ridiculous and sad pastiche copied from countless other examples. No, that's an insult to God. If God was creative, and he was, if you believe in God, and if man is made in the image of a resemblance of God, then man should be creative too. How come some theologians in some religions don't understand this? It amazes me. The very same church which is kind of at war with the Catholic Church, which always employ the best architects and the best artists to erect their churches. Do we do the same? No. In this country, we don't do the same. We don't even know who the architects are. There might be a Bernini in our country. There might be a Borromini, but the church doesn't use them, doesn't employ them. Look at this church, you know, it doesn't need to be adorned. It has an intrinsic modest beauty, and it's fine. Sacredness can be obtained or arrived at in the humblest of conditions. You know, we don't need you know, a lot of iconography or a lot of gold or whatever. There is no gold here. It's the intrinsic gold, the real gold, that gold that the alchemists searched for when they said aurum nostrum non est aurum vulgi. The real gold is not the vulgar one, the explicit one. Here you don't need, nothing is with gold. And the appearance of the building is not ambiguous, but you know, a more superficial observer would not even think that this is a church. It is a church. And look at the section. It is a musical inside. It's a musical instrument where the liturgy takes place. The liturgical space is an organ itself. I mean, the musical instrument. You look at the plan and you look at the sections, and you see the culmination of everything that is to the left, and here, the culmination here, you know, where it's supposed to. It's this ascension towards God, but not an arrogant one, not a demagogical one, not a rhetorical one, a calm one in a way, and yet distinctly aspiration. I mean, that's what I see. I see an aspiration, a growth towards the sacred, towards what we call the sacred. And even the forms change. The curves step in, wave-like, evoking the infinite. Otherwise, the building towards the outside is very discreet. And again, without adornments, without plaster, without ridiculous makeup. No, nothing. The truth. This is what you get when you employ a good architect. An architect who takes his role seriously. I said it before and I will say it again. The cathedral being built now in Bucharest is totally inappropriate for our time. It is to me unbelievable that in the 21st century we build like this. In as much as it was unbelievable that we build the so-called House of the Republic or of the people of the, during communism. It is exactly the same attitude. Two unacceptable megalomanies built one in the proximity of the other one. It is incredible, as if we learn nothing, absolutely nothing. But one we claim is for God and the other one was, for the people, but actually the very name of the buildings, they both invoke the people, Neamul, Poporul. The dimensions of the demagogical lie are incredible, incredibly high. Then nobody says anything. Nobody protests. The church is built. Two shameful buildings, one near the other, built with immense sacrifices, expensive, very expensive buildings. Here you have a modest building, but the level of spirituality and the creativity cannot be compared with what went into the aforementioned building. No way. This is true faith. What we have there is not true faith, it's demagogy. And nobody says anything. Bravo, Utzon. You give us a lesson of how the so-called sacred should be approached in our times. And look at this little detail, so to speak. It's just a step, no? But look how it is done. This corner shows a lot of skill and sensitivity. It's almost magical. It's very different from Carlos Scarpa, but it makes me think a little bit of Scarpa and his adoration of the joint, to use the words of Kenneth Frampton. It has dignity, this building. But it is a dignity that is real and is reticent. It doesn't need to be, emphatically shouted. No, it's discreet, but it is, you can notice it. Just look at these doors here. They are no more, no less. They are made of wood, and you see how they were built. And you can trust even the doors. You can trust the building from the very beginning, from the start, from the doors, from the handle of the door. Do we see a heliport here? Of course not. Do we see a parking with several levels here for I don't know how many cars? black Mercedeses or what? Of course not. Some Revit drawings of the same church. I don't know very well why I felt like showing them, but maybe in my attempt to encourage the students to learn softwares, because this is what it is in the present. I'm not a technological man, but I realize that if you don't know as well as possible, as many softwares as possible, you might not even find a job. What surprises me is that there are, very important thinkers about architecture who think that the computer destroyed architecture, and I don't think it's true. I don't think the computer destroyed architecture. It's almost like saying a certain pencil destroyed architecture. No, it depends what you do with it. There are important buildings built with a computer, and there are also questionable buildings, yes, but the same is true of any technique that you use. One thing is for sure, there are many buildings today which could not have been built if there was no computer. They would not have been even imaginable. Forget about building them. Yes, this building was not designed with a computer, but you see computer drawings of this building, which I don't think, create anything malevolent. No, the computer can be used, if properly used, is fine. The opera in Sydney, the well-known opera in Sydney. The competition drawings from 1956. And now is the time to tell you the story. What happened was John Utzon sent, as I think other architects do it, in a way, inadequate drawings. I think they were drawn in pencil and without maybe some necessary details, in a way, schematic drawings. And the jury at first eliminated his drawings, but the jury didn't have within it its chief, the chief juror, who was Eero Saarinen, the great Finnish American architect. Well, he was born in the United States, but his parents were Finnish. And he arrived one day later in Sydney because of some problems with a plane, with a flight from New York to Sydney. So he arrived one day later, and because he had probity, he was, a serious professional. He took his role seriously. He wanted to see the projects that the other members of the jury eliminated already, including the work by John Utzon. And coming across, discovering the work of Utzon, and also having the important position he had in the jury, he was able to convince the other members of the jury that this was not a project to be ignored or banished or rejected. So he was able to make the whole jury agree that it had merit, this project. And that's why John Utzon won. So you see, it's almost like by chance in a way. If Eero Saarinen would not have been curious to look into the projects that had been rejected, Sydney would not have had this building. It was also the chance of the fact that, at that time, Eero Saarinen was building the TWA terminal on the JFK Kennedy Airport, which has an aesthetic that is not very different to an extent from the opera in Sydney. So there was an empathy, a sympathy towards that project. And that sympathy shows clearly that any evaluation in architecture is only in part objective. And this was shown to me clearly when I contemplated the projects sent to Japan to an architectural competition some years ago, the two jurors of the competition being Tadao Ando and Jean Nouvel. And out of 1,000 projects, Jean Nouvel chose 10 projects and Tadao Ando chose 10 projects, but they didn't choose one single project, both of them. So we cannot accuse Tadao Ando and Jean Nouvel as being superficial or without, careless. No, it's just that they had different preferences. This is why I don't understand how in certain schools of architecture the evaluations take place. Because one professor or one evaluator likes minimalist architecture, another professor likes Rococo architecture. So who is right and who is wrong? Evaluations are never objective, totally objective in architecture, because they cannot be. They belong to the capriciousness of taste. They have to do with aesthetics. In art, you cannot, it's not like in mechanics or mathematics where, 1 + 1 = 2. It's not like that. That's why grades are, in my opinion, at least in part, debatable. And the fact that the project by John Utzon at first was rejected, and I'm sure that the other members of the jury were capable, well-intentioned, serious and sensitive professionals. Still, they didn't appreciate this work. It took the courage of Eero Saarinen to choose it and to make it begin, so choose it and then begin the construction based on it. So you see some of the drawings he sent. This was the text, but the drawing itself is very. These were the four drawings that he sent. I mean, this could have been done even by a student in architecture. Really, he won. He won for a major building in Sydney. He won because he had a vision and he was able to express it, and he was lucky that Eero Saarinen was the chief juror. If there was another architect, I mean, look at this perspectival drawing. It's a sketch in a way, but it's fine. I would say in fact, I value it more than the very emphatic renditions of the present. It's true, I did say that you cannot compete today with the big companies because they are very sophisticated, and it's true. And most of the time, we don't have in the juries people like Eero Saarinen. This was an initial sketch for the opera in Sydney. The man loved the sea, he loved sailing, he loved ships. And here is a clear indication of that love. Here is the man, the proud Dane, because then after winning the competition, it was a big trouble to find the way to build those roofs. And the greatest engineers on earth, Ove Arup, were involved for, I don't know, 2 years or so. And in the end, apparently it was still him who discovered, and you'll see what. And it's still, I should have studied more carefully, but this was a complex matter, how to build those roofs that he drew, in pencil. It's one thing to make the drawing, it's another thing to build it. But as you can see, it is built and it is magnificent. Yes, magnificent. You can have a vision and express it very modestly. At that time, it worked. I don't know if today it should still be possible somehow, but I doubt that many juries would be seduced easily by handmade drawing these days. But who knows? For example, Maya Lin, a second-year student, won the competition for the memorial, the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., with an even more, how to call it, simple, minimalist rendering, a great win for Maya Lin, and a great encouragement for any student who has something to say it. But this was an adventure, and I keep saying architecture should be lived as an adventure. If it is not an adventure, it succumbs to its role of becoming architecture. Now, of course, not every building is supposed to be like the opera in Sydney. Of course, we saw housing, those housing projects by Utzon. He was able to address different kinds of functions, different kinds of problematics, and adequately. He would not have proposed something like this for a single family house in Denmark. Of course not. But this was a public building, a symbolic building for a powerful city. And again, in the proximity of the water. Now, could you contradict me that a great building is an adventure? This was an adventure. Look at the beauty of the building site. You can tell that these people who built this building were adventurers. They were dealing with a new building, and I think a great building is great at any stage of construction. It doesn't matter what stage, there is still beauty, because the spirit of the building is still there. And even if he was not in the last phase of implementing the project, the start was done by John Utzon. The building belongs to him. Look at the beauty of the ironwork. I mean, there is beauty here. I feel it, because it's that spirit that animates every part of the work, and at any stage of its implementation. It moves me, because it's actually, in the end, is a collective work. In as much as Chartres Cathedral was a collective work, here we have a few names. We know a few engineers, we know the architect, but in the end, it was a collective work. This building could not have been built by John Utzon alone, of course. He made the project, but then there was a conjunction of efforts. It was a collective, and look at them here. It's about the joy of discovering. It's the joy of these people, like children. They look, because architecture has to have passion, and it has to have an element of playing. And that's where the joy comes from. You discover new things. This building never existed before. It exists now, but it never existed before. So it was a creation, a vision of that man on the left. Bravo to him. And apparently, there is a connection between how the roofs were, in the end, calculated and arrived at, from the suggestion coming from the orange tree, the orange. The orange, yes. Architecture, again, is beautiful when it is joyous, and when it is about discovering, and when it is an adventure. Otherwise, it's a bore. Like anything else. Look at these beautiful drawings here. It's just a fragment. Of course, the man was happy. Anyone would be happy, not because he won, or not only because of that, because he did something that was a discovery, a creation, something, alive and interesting. Look at this. Fear disappears. When you see something like this, fear disappears, because you realize you are not alone. There is the water around you. There is the sky above you. There is maybe a God in that sky. There are other people working together with you. You are connected. You feel connected. Then look at him. He laughs. Of course he laughs. He's happy. I would be happy in his place too. Now, how many people, when they do their projects, have such a laughter? I don't think too many, because not too many arrive at this level of creativity, unfortunately. The building suffered some modifications, and as I said, the last phase in its implementation, he was not there, but in good measure, this is his work. So the history of Sydney Opera House is as extraordinary and complex as the building itself. It is a story of vision, courage, dedication, challenge, controversy, and triumph. Beautiful. It's exactly like in the case of a great symphonic work. You know, there were composers who at first were ridiculed or rejected, and then in the end they triumphed. Bach himself suffered from a few centuries of neglect, and others. Its many remarkable elements include the submission of a visionary design that the judges courageously selected. Well, here it is not said. There is courageously, but after Eero Saarinen stepped in. The collaborative partnership of architect and engineer that produced groundbreaking construction solutions. The bridge created by John Utzon's departure from the project in 1966, as I mentioned, and his re-engagement in 1999 to provide design principle to guide Sydney Opera House in the future. But this was 33 years later. It began in 1956 when the New South Wales government announced an international design competition and appointed an independent jury. The competition brief did not specify design parameters. Sorry, I don't have, I should have had a continuation of this text, but I don't. Anyway, what do we learn from contemplating this building? I think the same things that you actually know and that I mention from time to time. It takes courage, determination, inspiration, belief in what you are doing, and in the end, the joy of discovery, the joy of creativity. Without that joy. Now, the National Assembly building in Kuwait, 1982, this is a building that is different from the opera in Sydney. Is a governmental building. It's a political building. And I think as a good Dane, despite his obvious creativity, John Utzon respected authority. So you'll see that respect in this building. It has exaltation. You see the roofing here, but you also see the rhythm here, the equidistant structural elements that express authority, order, rhythm. They are not using the classical columns. Actually, it's an interesting variation in a way. It's a modern building, but it expresses its function. It is a governmental institutional building. So he designed this. It's a larger complex, and we are going to see the plans. Although it is a large span and a big heavy roof, the way he treated this roof is in a light way. It's not heavy. The roof doesn't seem to be heavy. Yesterday we talked about a structure which didn't reject beauty and even ornament as a servant to beauty. Well, that's what we see here. Is a structure, is clearly structure, but it is not a structure which rejects aesthetics, and thus structure becomes infused with what aesthetics are about. That is, with beauty. There is no contradiction between structure and aesthetics. It's quite large, this complex. And we see, although Utzon was obviously a modern architect, look at the kind of ornaments and or decoration even that he used relating to the culture of the place. But I would say there is no, there is obviously some difference, but I think they negotiate between each other quite well. The modernity of the building in general and insertions of ornamental design or decorations even that are, I think they are not disturbing the modernity of the whole of building. And you see, it's a large, it's a campus almost, you know, it's a big complex of buildings. It wasn't built quite like this. You'll see a certain difference, but in essence, it was kind of like this. This is how it was built. Again, the proximity of water, which with Utzon cannot be underestimated. Another drawing which shows his lyrical and almost expressionistic side, even in terms of colors, you know, is not descriptive. You know, if here we are going to see the sky is never yellow, but the light of the sun is or could be. And then you have blue and yellow are, or orange, light orange, they are opposite colors. So there is a good intuition, even chromatically, of what he wanted to. I like this drawing. I think he was able, with a few lines, to say a lot. And look at the reality of the built work. It's almost magical, really. Yesterday, again, we talked about structure. Well, here we have structure, but it is a structure which is designed, which has, as I said, a concern for how it looked like and for its aesthetics. And that structure becomes, at least in part, ornamental, because it sustains the beauty of the building. Just like in the church in Copenhagen, we have, you know, courtyards and, you know, this rather pedestrian kind of architecture. And then we have the more emphatic one for the public spaces. And this is not a tent, but looks like a tent and feels like a tent, is appropriate for the culture of the place. It's a rational architecture, but it's also sensitive, almost sentimental architecture. It takes into consideration the place, the culture, the climate. It belongs there. This is the facade of the building towards the courtyard. Now, another interesting building by him, which is now the Utzon Center in Aalborg in Denmark. And here we see again the importance of the roofing. The roofing is the one that exalts the building, just as it happens in some parts of the building, in the church that we saw in Copenhagen, and also in the assembly hall that we just saw. Again, the proximity of the water, the sailing, you know, that is evoked through these roofs. And it's a very fine building. It shows clearly that architecture cannot remain at the level of having no symbolism, no metaphor, no intermediary between the earth and the sky. These roofs are exactly that. They are an intermediate portion of the building that mediates between the earth and the sky. Just like the endless column by Brancusi was called by a critic ring of conjunction, a conjunctive ring between the earth and the sky. These roofs do just this. They negotiate between the earth and the sky, the vastness of the sky. I see this building and some of his other buildings as acting within that field of negotiating between the sacred and the profane. There is no church here, it's true, but such a roofing makes you feel, makes you think about the vastness of the sky, the mystery of creation, the, you know, cosmos. Thus, you know, maybe to an extent would not feel provoked or insulted or I don't know, unnecessarily complimented by associating the word sacred with their function. While here we have the profane, you know, the base is profane, is profane, but there is a dialogue between the two. The roof also needs this space. The sacred needs the profane needs the sacred. They need each other. It's a very fine building. And again, we have multiplicity in unity. We have these, you know, smaller units than we have where the public rooms are more emphatically treated, just like he did in the previous buildings that we saw. It's an excellent building. And it's a building which is in a way more than a building. It's like a community of buildings. So the building itself becomes almost an urban entity, a cluster of buildings. Thus, you achieve that unity between res publica and res privata. You unite the private with the public in a very general sense, using these words. You see here a few names at letter F and G. Sverre Fehn, a very important Norwegian architect, Jonna Friedman, Massimiliano Fuchsas, Su Fujimoto, Future System, Frank Gehry. When are we going to have a Romanian architect here? We can, but we must work hard and allow ourselves to search for joy and for meaningful creativity. We see the interior, I mentioned, is not a sacred space, but looking at the roof, we remember the works of that church, the work done in that church in Copenhagen. Do you see how the roofing exalts? This is its role, to exalt. Just as this is the role of art. And just as it is a role of architecture, architecture should also not ignore the value of exaltation. Which is a spiritual quality. It has to do with spirit, with psychology, with the soul. Now we arrive at the last work. The last work that I present now is an unrealized project for his friend Asger Jorn, and it's very interesting that one was called Asger Jorn and the other one Jorn Utzon. So the family name of Asger Jorn was Jorn, and the first name of Jorn Utzon was Jorn. And there is a beautiful picture showing this great artist, Asger Jorn, and the great architect, John Utzon, together. And we'll arrive at it, and I will say a few words then. Asger Jorn asked John Utzon to build a museum for him, and unfortunately he died rather young, at 50 something, and the building was not built. But we have the project. This is the plan. Was to be a lot, in good measure, underground. And apparently, because of the conditions of the soil, it would have been very difficult to build it. But this is, I think, also a post-mortem excuse. You know, John Utzon was not alive. Asger Jorn was not alive. And those who follow them didn't have the same, their soul was not there they could have built this building, but they chose not to. The John Utzon Foundation realized, when they commemorated John Utzon, they created a virtual installation with a project, and they called it Fata Morgana. It wasn't really a Fata Morgana. This building could have been built, but was not built because the two creators, John Utzon and Asger Jorn, were not there any longer. Here they are, the two of them, with a section through the building, and I would almost say the great building. It would have been a great building, but let's see if I have a larger image of this beautiful picture. I hope I do. Yes, is this. No, anyway, that's all I have, but I love this picture, and I can explain why. On the left, the artist. On the right, the architect. On the left, the artist with a hand, with his hands evoking some kind of a vertical between his two hands. On the right, the other kid, John Utzon, with his hands evoking some kind of a horizontal. And you can tell the friendship and the joy of having the painter and a very special man, actually. I suggest to you to search for his works. A great painter, Asger Jorn, and the architect. There was friendship, there was understanding, there was joy. You can tell from their expressions, and these are not the expressions of two indifferent people. These are the expressions of two highly involved men earning their lives in the act of creation. I love this picture, and I don't know why it's cut at the bottom, but anyway, I have the smaller resolution here. You see them. It's if taken from a different angle, but is the same thing. Is the conjunction between art and architecture. That's what I see here, beautifully expressed through the through an artist and an architect who happen to be also friends and who admired each other. So there was reciprocity. This is a drawing done with pencil, just as he did for the opera in Sydney on yellow tracing paper. And look at the section and the elevation, what was above the ground. It was rigorous. It was a rigorous drawing, but it was also a sensitive drawing. And what else can I say? This is architecture. What we look at is architecture and nothing else. Bravo to Utzon. Also bravo to Asger Jorn. Painter and architect. Asger Jorn left, John Utzon right. We saw this picture. And I wish we'll have again such glorious friendships and collaborations between artists and architects We cannot continue our frigid solitude. You know, we have to shake hands with the artists. Everybody will benefit. We will also have to wake up the artist within ourselves. And some virtual representations of what the museum might have been, the so-called Fata Morgana, as the foundation, John Utzon, called it, but I think they named it inappropriately. This building should still be built. Look at the section. Now I understand the soil there was very humid, very, inadequate, but it could have been built somewhere else if they truly wanted to build. And Denmark is a powerful country economically. They would have had the resources. But what they missed and miss is the people like Asger Jorn and John Utzon. They have other people, of course, but they don't have them. And that's what it is. But maybe in the future, who knows? Maybe it will be built. It could be built. It's a vision, again. You might agree with it or you might not agree with it, but it is a vision. It is a building that was inspired to John Utzon from maybe contemplating the paintings of Asger Jorn or his relationship with Asger Jorn. I like what I see. It's one of those projects which were not built, but which could have been built and should have been built. But even if not built, they are significant for the history of architecture. You see the Fata Morgana, fantastic. It's not so fantastic. It could have been built, but unfortunately, Utzon was dead, and so was Asger Jorn. And this was an image, of the museum as it could have been painted outside by Asger Jorn himself, who unfortunately died at 50 something. Okay, and now we go to the second architect that we'll talk about today, Dominique Perrault, also born today, and sorry to Jean Prouvé that we are not going to talk about him, but we wish him a happy birthday as well. Jean Prouvé was also born today. Dominique Perrault, the man who built, just like John Utzon is known mostly for his opera in Sydney, Dominique Perrault is mostly known for La Bibliotheque de France, the Library of France, built in Paris. As you can see, the man received received honors from, I don't know, the French Academy, or I should have shown the whole picture, but you can notice his smile, the smile of accomplishment, and his splendid attire. I like the man and I like his work. And I know a graduate from UAM who worked for him. There is a young architect who worked for Dominique Perrault, and now she works for Su Fujimoto. Bravo to her. Apparently, if I remember correctly, I didn't verify now, but I read that he studied first philosophy. And he does have the expression of a philosopher. That is when he doesn't receive decorations. I like his expression here. He seems to have an inquisitive side, quite appropriately for a philosopher. Yes, you smile. Of course you smile, Mr. Perrault, because you did it. You built a lot of buildings. In fact, so many that at one moment I got a little bit tired today trying to place them in the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, some drawings by Dominique Perrault. There is a level of exaltation here too, and we are going to see this tower that he built in Japan. We see the big tree, you know, in between quotation marks. Now, of course, the tree usually has the foliage at the upper part, not at the bottom, but it is still an interesting building that he built. These are some sketches for the La Bibliothèque de France with the four towers, like four open books, you know, partially opened. And it was built like this. Interesting, his handwriting, you know, a little bit Baroque, a little bit old-fashioned. Who would sign like this these days? Other sketches, a section, a study for a section for the La Bibliothèque de France. This is a technical drawing, but it's interesting. So what do we see in these sketches? We see nervousness, no? We see temperament, because a sketch should have this. It's your inner nature that is supposed to express itself in a few strokes. Or here, for a theater in Japan, and we are going to see the building. There is expression here. That's what we see, expression, expressivity. This was not built, but it looks interesting. One of his sketches in his notebooks with a building which is in good measure underground. I guess it's for a church. There seems to be St. Peter or something. Again, sketches for the Library of France. Une manière de lire, a manner of reading, Dominique Perrault, and with a plan of that mentioned Library of France. And this was a project for Vienna in Austria, and he built one tower, not two, for the moment. You are going to see it. I had the chance to visit it, and it's a good building. Another building where you see again the value of the roof. The building opens up at the roof. Opens up somehow almost respecting ad literam what Mircea Eliade said. Break the roof, you know, briser le toit de ta maison, break the roof of your house. Why? In order to allow for the vertical contamination or dialogue, you know, with what is above. Wolf Prix put it differently. Let it bleed, let it leak. But it's again about breaking the roof, allowing the gods or the angels or whatever, even the rain, to enter the building. Through them, God. Now, this is a factory. He built a number of factories. He started kind of in this way, 1981, 1983 in France, a modernistic structure, decent architecture, yes. He became very refined. I mean, his architecture is often, you know, rather, you know, Cartesian, but is very subtly detailed and designed, and there is a sensitivity there that makes the buildings transcend a simple or simplistic, dry, rationalistic architecture. The housing estate, Le Cap Ornier, Le Nantes, 1983, I couldn't find pictures. Academy for Engineers of Electronics and Electrical Engineering, Man-la-Valais in France. You know, this architecture in its purity, it transcends the prose of the function, if I can call it so. There is an aspiration here towards something else. And look from above, there is order, there is structure, there is vision even, you know, there is novelty even. Dominique Perrault, one of the major architects of France and of the world. I think a good work is when there is a marriage between order and disorder. And here we see these little openings, you know, expressing just that, a certain need to express, to externalize what might be called disorder or an aleatory movement here. And in another industrial building, Hôtel Industriel Jean-Baptiste Berlier in Paris. A lot of glass, but the glass has divisions. It's not just large pieces of glass. And I think this creates a different feeling. Water processing plant. You know, the functions seem so, you know, uninspiring somehow, but look at the building. It's architecture. His architecture is a water processing plant, but he built a building that could receive the name architecture. A conference center in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, 1988, 1991. This one is a little bit mysterious. I couldn't, what I see here, I like. He did the extension of a chateau, of a castle. This is the castle. And I don't know if he did exactly the house in reverse, underground. He placed here, you know, le disque de verre. It's like a lake around the chateau. And I imagine he built it underground, but I couldn't find pictures nor adequate sections. But that sketch seems to say that he built some kind of a castle in reverse underground. So he didn't build this, this existed. He built the extension, but upside down underground, and not just as a reflection, as you see it here. Interesting idea. I did myself once a project, maybe that's why I like it, in a way very similar, the so-called Casa Clepsydra, the hourglass house, with two corpses, two bodies, one on the hill and one in the valley. I was influenced by Lucian Blaga and his theory of the hill valley psychological trait of Romanians. The house on the hill and the house in the valley, and the house in the valley being the reverse of the house on the hill. Actually, the tomb of the inhabitants on the house on the hill. I sent it to Japan to a competition. I don't know what happened to that. I had a picture somewhere, but not any longer. I don't know what happened to that picture. Well, the reverse is a little bit different, as you can see, not quite. The idea was the so-called concept, but the underground is not literally reproducing what is above the ground. An apartment building, Le Louis Lumière, is this building here. Very interesting landscape around, French gardening. Meuse department headquarters. Not afraid to bring the new in the proximity of the old. Water again. (1989, 1993). I like this extension by him. You know, I don't think it's provoking in a negative way the old building. Is asserting the new, is asserting the present, but at the same time, because of the height and even, you know, the proportions, otherwise it pays homage, it respects the existing. The aesthetics are very close to what we are going to see next in La Bibliothèque de France. So the new building doesn't have to mimic the old one at all. It could be distinctly new and yet connect still with the preceding structure, with the old. And that's what I think we should do. Never mimic, the past. Express the present, express even the future, but do not neglect the past. Try to connect with it somehow. And this building does connect from its distinctive position, but it does connect. And now we arrive at his most famous work, the French National Library, built in Paris between 1989 and 1995. He won the competition, just as John Utzon won the competition for the opera in Sydney. So again, it's important to take part in competitions if you feel you have a calling for architecture. So you saw already some sketches. There are essentially 4 identical towers in the corners of a rectangle, like open books, and then a sunken garden in the center. Interesting symbolism here in a way, as if knowledge somehow is, positioning garden at a lower level does seem to say something, and I'm not sure it's something very convenient for ourselves and for our time, as if man won the battle with nature, but this nature could erupt at any time. You know, we placed it underground here, but even from the underground, nature could erupt, maybe with even more pathos or intensity. The buildings are fine, they are very well proportioned, but they have a problem. There is too much glass, and then he had to bring in interior oblongs because books don't love too much sunlight. And now those wooden oblongs look fine, and they do protect, but then there is much less natural light inside the building. You see here the oblongs. And as I mentioned some other day, oblongs are very convenient for controlling the light. And so they even aesthetically, either they are placed inside or the outside of the building, but they are good tools in the hands of the user of the space. And on the other hand, excessive glass is problematic. And this is another proof that just like the Richards laboratories by Louis Kahn, the scientists had to cover in a less gracious way than here with aluminum foil, the large pieces of glass, because that sunlight disturbed them in the laboratories. I have seen this building twice, and I have to say that I find it a little bit problematic, this sunken garden. I think it's a little bit provocative towards nature, this, you know, I mean, you walk, you know, here and you see the, you know, the top part of the trees, and it's a little bit unsettling, but otherwise I think it's a good project. It's monumental, it's subtle in a way. There is l'esprit de géométrie and l'esprit de finesse. All in all, this is what this project seems to say. Through knowledge, man conquered nature. And it's a little bit, I think, ambitious, this statement. I mean, it is at the center, nature. It is in the center of this whole design, but it is sunken. And on the other hand, the separation of the level of the towers and the entrance into the library from the rest of the city, you know, through these many steps is a little bit, I understand he wanted to create some kind of an island, an oasis, but there is a separation that is also a little bit triumphalist, is, you know, this massive platform on which the actual building is built is, I don't know. There is a level of rhetoric here that is maybe a little bit questionable. I have been on those. I know. I climbed those stairs. Now, a small art gallery in Paris, 1991. His work is sometimes close to some form of minimalism. another good work, the Olympic Velodrome and Olympic Swimming Pool in Berlin, in Germany, 1992, 1999. Impressive roof, although it is flat, but being circular, it's almost science fiction. He has a great capacity for ordering, for order. And it is an order that almost has some cosmic attributes somehow here and there. So I think he's also interested in the symbolism, symbolics of the project. Maybe the elevation of the building is not so impressive. It looks better from above. Although the detailing, this masking of the building is kind of interesting because it's subtle and it's like a veil. A technical center of books, interesting name, Technical Center of Books in France, but I don't have, I searched a little bit, but I couldn't find pictures. The great greenhouse for the Cité des Sciences de l'Industrie, but I think it's just inside a building designed by another architect. It's not very clear to me what he did here. But it does look like a Dominique Perrault intervention. Greenhouse. Now the Innsbruck town hall in Austria, which is, they have an old town hall in Innsbruck. He built this new one, this building here, in a difficult context somehow, you know. Maybe he chose wrongly to connect too much with the existing buildings. Maybe he could have proposed something totally different, but he didn't. And I asked a friend who lives in Innsbruck to tell me about this building, and he's an architect. He told me he's not impressed. Maybe this courtyard is fine, but from the outside, the building is a little bit confusing, you know, because of the attempt he made to connect too literally somehow, in a way, with the buildings. I would have made something totally different here, but he didn't. Anyway, plus he likes checkers sometimes, and checkers are an easy way out. In this way, didn't quite work, I think. It's a simplistic way of creating variety. Now here we see, my God, the Court of Justice in Luxembourg, it keeps growing and growing. They had one building, then two, then three, five. You know, it's like justice needs thousands of lawyers. You build these two towers, which are not bad, but I don't know, they are a little bit crushing, you know. And also this building is also dedicated to justice. And now other buildings had been built. It's like justice became, I mean, of course it should be a preoccupation of humankind, but this excessive institutionalization of justice scares me. Just like Renzo Piano built in Paris, you know, the Palace of Justice. My God, is competing with Tour Eiffel, who has the supremacy in the city as an urban presence. Huge. I mean, is crashing the whole city, that so-called Palace of Justice built by Renzo Piano. Here we also see this, the institutionalization of justice scares me indeed. Because it became an industry. Yes, the building is okay, the towers are okay, maybe even the sketch is okay. The sketch is nervous, but the signature is almost Baroque or in an old-fashioned way, and a lot of arrows. Anyway, he built it. I don't know if he built this tower too, or even this one. He built these first two. Now there are 4 towers. Soon will be a city, all dedicated to justice. It's a little bit scary, I think. Because I think the more buildings we are building for justice, the less justice we have. And that's why we need so many so-called structures. I know for the Palace of Justice in Paris, it was estimated that, I don't know, 11,000 lawyers per month, if not per week, would use the building. My God, my God. I mean, look at this. It's a mini Manhattan dedicated to justice. Again, the buildings are fine. Even this symbolic centralized space is kind of interesting, but sorry, I wish I had another picture from the inside, but I don't. Anyway, another building, industrial manufacturing unit, also in France. I said he likes checkers. As you can see here also, not on this side of the building. There are various sides of the buildings, but he still doesn't get rid of that checkers attraction. This is interesting though, but I don't know. I mean, it's a factory. It reminds me a little bit of the Louvre Museum built by Sejima, which I like very much, also in France. Lucie Aubrac Multimedia Library in France. I like the most the way it is written here, Médiathèque, in a playful way. Nice, a nice break from the rather, austere or aesthetics of the building. But thanks to that wording, is a little bit playful. In this period of time, he built some, I would say, not so remarkable buildings. Well built, correct, but not very interesting. But he will go over this period, and you will see some interesting things in the last part of the presentation, which will follow soon. Mediathèque. Yes, we need that side, the rebelliousness of the child who writes, with different sizes letters and crooked letters and so on. This is, again, from the same period, Monte Gala Sport Complex in Barcelona. Nothing really exceptional. He worked with another architect here. I don't know. I think he accepted some of these commissions because he had to run a big office, and he could have been more creative, I think, but he was not. So, what can I say? You see here the architects, Dominique Perrault and Salazar Navarro, the Catalan perhaps, and they worked together on this complex sportif in Barcelona. Another Barcelona work, a hotel. What can we say? A nice plan, maybe too nice, maybe too predictable. And the building, what can we say? A good portion of it is cantilevered. This one is supported by nothing except that is attached to the one who actually touches the ground. You'll see a section which is almost frightening. Maybe not. Maybe the word shouldn't be so harsh, so categorical. But it does have the feeling that, I mean, this part of the building is the whole of it is actually cantilevered. Look at the section, I don't know, it's something a little bit so-called unnatural here. It's as if this part of the building is glued to the other part, and if the glue fails, and at one point the whole of it will fall to the ground, maybe. Anyway, I hope not, of course, but it is a little bit strange for my taste. Otherwise, what can we say? Another office building, also in Barcelona, also obviously Dominique Perrault with his cantilever. Fortunately, he moved away from this mannerism from this period in his life. It's not a bad building, but is it great architecture? I don't know. A factory in Maryland, USA, 2001, 2004. He uses this also for a theater in France, which I like, in Albi, where he places a mask or a veil, but here the veil is rectangular and maybe it's not as convincing as that theater, which we are going to see a little bit later. A little bit a convenient way to make the facade, the main facade of the building, a little bit mysterious or a little bit acceptable or interesting or nice looking. A cafe in Innsbruck, again, I don't know. I mean, it's a round cafe. It's fine, I guess, but it's not very adventurous in my opinion, and thus not very creative. But you know, the circle is always conveniently taking us out from the square or the rectangle of our lives. The Olympic Tennis Stadium in Madrid, 2002, 2009, where maybe even the championship promoted and founded by Cyriac is taking place. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know enough about tennis. I build this, sports structure. Again, I don't think it's very impressive, but it was that. Now, this work I like. 2004, 2006 is a small no theater in Japan, Niigata. And I think, it's just a small work, but because of that exuberant roofing, it says something to me, and I like it. I like it, and I think the no actors and the spectators feel good there. This traditional theater of Japan is worth studying. I don't know myself a lot about it, but the little I know makes me curious to study more about it. And look, you get surrealism in architecture when the roofing is as it is in this case. So the philosopher Dominique Perrault was capable of, a certain kind of exaltations from time to time, at least. It was probably the no theater that inspired him and exalted him. But here we see two kinds of exaltation. In a way, the word exaltation maybe is not so proper to describe the trees around. But we see the work of man and we see the work of nature or God, and there seems to be some kind of a dialogue between the two. This is a work I like. In fact, I would say I like it very much. It's a college for women in Seoul, in South Korea, 2004, 2008. This is the work. It's essentially some kind of the presence of absence. If you look at the plan, you would see you'd think the building is here. The building is actually here, the left and right. And this is a rift, a walk between the two buildings. Also with the possibility to walk on top of the buildings. I think he did a good work here, Dominique Perrault. This is the monumentality of this passage between the two buildings. So at the center In a way, there is a relationship with the Library of France, because he placed at the center a sunken space. It's just that he didn't place here nature. Nature is actually above. And this is just for the people to socialize, to walk, and so on. I think it's a good building. And even inside the buildings themselves, the space is impressive. So here we have a fruitful dialogue between what we call landscape and what we call architecture. This is one of his best projects, in my opinion. It is clear conceptually, it is sensitive, it brings up nature, and it's a very convincing work. And you see, when you see this plan, you think that this is the building, and this is the space outside of the building, when in fact the buildings are underneath these landscaped roofs, and this is just an open space in between the two buildings. These are the buildings. But if you didn't see pictures of the building, you would think that this is the building. No. So the building is there where it is not. And even inside the building, I think, has some qualities. Yes, maybe it's too grayish or whatever, but the public dimension of the building is addressed. Even in the winter, it looks nice, I think, because it almost vanishes. Otherwise, a big building, it's not an easy thing to do this. All of a sudden, he transformed a big construction into something else. It would have been deadly if he would have built above the ground. If you add up the volumes of these two buildings, and it would have been a deadly building. It did something, it chose correctly, I think, here, and in an inspired way. Look at the sections. So I am tempted to speculate that actually architecture is not only about what you build, but also about what you abstain from building, what you don't build. Just as in music, and just as in speech. Sometimes the silence, the absence of music, is not the absence of something being said. There is fullness in the emptiness of absence, sometimes. This is also a good building, and I saw it in Vienna. It's a tower. He planned two towers, but only one was built. The DC tower is this one. And very elegantly done with expensive materials. It's black. But he didn't say no to variation, to movement, as you can see here, even to aleatory movement. He planned two towers, but only one was built. Maybe, I don't know, when was it built? After the September 11. Yes, maybe unconsciously or consciously, there is some kind of a reference to the Twin Towers, and with a rift in between, because this side, this elevation is the only one, just like here, which evokes a rift, a breaking apart. And I don't know. Anyway, only one was built for the moment. I don't know exactly what these things are. They exist, but I don't know what they are. some students I went with, I think they went all the way to the top of the building because it's possible where there is a bar or something and you can contemplate the panorama of the city of Vienna from it. This facade is the most interesting one. The DC Tower, Dominique Perrault in Vienna. It's black actually, but because of the reflected clouds, it looks differently. It is monumental and it is sculpture, and you know, the two qualities sometimes add something to architecture. There is a so-called vibration here at play, which makes one think in a patriotic way of the endless column by Brâncuș, doesn't it? As opposed to the other buildings around. Another tower in Fukoku, the Fukoku Tower in Osaka, 2006-2010. Here we also have, you see, he used prismatic architectures, but he also problematized them sometimes, at least in his best works. And this kind of fragmentation is important. Done with some expenditures, of course, but it's important, you know, it's breaking the box in a way. The demagogy, or should I say the mythology of glass is still present, too much so, but what can we do? Glass is our material par excellence. We can't breathe without glass, it seems. Not truly thinking about the great losses in energy and so on. We love glass. This is the sketch that you already saw for this building, the big tree. It's kind of an upside down tree, isn't it? Because the foliage, so to speak, is at the base, not at the top. Or a tree in the autumn. This theater, which I mentioned, I think is a good work. I think is the last work I present now from his oeuvre, 2009-2014. Essentially is a prismatic building, is a rectangular building, but it has this mask, this veil, which I think is very efficient. So, you know, it's a possible strategy here. You make a building that doesn't disturb anyone, that functions very well, and then you create a second facade all around the building that emphasizes a certain attribute of the building. In this case, it was theater. It was supposed to be a theater, and thus the idea of a mask is very acceptable, I would say. The interior, what can I say, is fine. It's red, it's black, it's functional, and it's, you know, moderately emotionally charged. But the idea again is you have this veil, geometrical veil, that is acting as an attribute of otherness, because theater represents an other activity, you know. Theater is other, just as the library, he seemed to say in the Bibliotheque De France project, is other. That's why he elevated it from the other ground zero and, you know, creating some kind of a distinctive monument dedicated to knowledge. Here he was more discreet. Of course, it was a different kind of building, a different kind of budget, a different kind of city, albeit it's a small city. But I think he did a good work. And inside, yes, he didn't have to be flamboyant. In the sunset light, it looks great, you know, and it has something almost Japanese about it. Interestingly, he was more expressionistic in his little theater for Japan than in the one done in Europe, in Albi. I think it's a good building. It's a theater. It's a theater, and it's not done with, you know, an excessiveness which many people might associate with theater. It's done simply, yet efficiently and distinctly. I would say it's a good response. A little bit of playfulness with the stairs, of course, and the platforms in the hallway. And the theater stands up in the urban fabric quite well. Also at the level of the street from both sides, as you can see here, is this veil, this mask mentions, or no, the word verb to mention is not the, says something about, as I said, the otherness of the function of the building. It stands out a little bit, but not aggressively, as opposed to the other buildings around. It is suggested. It is a discrete suggestion of the otherness of theater, and I think it's fine. And I think this is the last picture of this presentation on Dominique Perrault, and let's wish him a happy birthday. Thank you.